Temple University. This is Profiles in Literature, featuring interviews with authors and illustrators prominent in American literature for children. The moderator for this series is Dr. Jaqueline Shachter, Professor of Children's Literature with Temple University.
It's with pleasure that I welcome to Profiles in Literature Jean Fritz, an outstanding children's author of historical fiction, whom I've come to know as a friend. Joining me in discussion with her is Carolyn Field, Director of the Office on Work with Children of the Free Library of Philadelphia and co-sponsor of our series of videotapes. Jean, do tell us why you, as a person born in Hankow, China, have such an interest in writing American historical fiction.
I think it's perhaps because I was born in Hankow, China, because I went to a British school and I felt very alienated being so far away from America, and very American, because at this British school I was constantly, well, there was one Scotch boy who would, every day at recess, he would cause trouble for me by saying nasty things about America, and I had to fight him. So I've been fighting the Revolutionary War a long time.
Tell me, how did your folks wind up in China?
They were missionaries.
Connected with the YMCA?
Connected with the YMCA.
Which of your books comes closest to describing the loneliness you may have felt far away from your fellow Americans?
I did feel lonely because I had no brothers or sisters and no friends close by. And when I wrote the story of the cabin faced west here, it was really, as I started writing it and as I wrote it, I thought it was a fictional story about my grandmother's grandmother, because it's built around a true incident. But after it was all done, I realized it was really a story of myself, that the loneliness of Anne Hamilton in this book was really my loneliness. She was in a lonely situation in Pioneer, Pennsylvania in the 1790s, and I think that I just simply transcribed my own emotions to her, and that's how that book came to be.
There was an actual Anne Hamilton?
There was an actual Anne Hamilton who, it's hard to believe that makes it sound 200 years sound so close to say she was my grandmother's grandmother, but so she was.
And she actually invited George Washington for supper?
Well, she was out picking berries one day, and a man came along on a horse, and he stopped her, and he said, "Little girl, what are you going to have for supper tonight?" And she told him what her mother was making, and he said, "Would you please tell your mother that General Washington would like to have supper with her?" So he wrote about it in his diary that night, and he said that he baited, which is an old-fashioned word for having supper and your horse also being sufficiently hayed, and he baited at the Hamiltons.
That's interesting, isn't it? With a gasoline shortage, we
yes,
have to go back to having our horses provided for. Do you have a reminder of Anne?
This little figure of Anne that a friend of my son's made that reproduces the jacket, I think, very well, and really reminds me of Anne against her fence.
Jean told me she washed the apron in honor of
today. Yes, that's right.
Do you have some reminders of China here?
On this far table over here, I have this very distinguished-looking gentleman, is an officer, an official of some kind. I don't know what kind, but he's been in my home ever since I was a child, and the brass fisherman has, over the last 50 years, lost his fishing pole and his fish, but otherwise he's complete. And the little orange and black cat with a flat face came from my childhood and was made by hand by my Chinese ama, and he remains with me now.
Did you learn to speak Chinese when you were living in China?
Before English. I spoke Chinese before English.
Do you still understand it if you hear a
Well,
Chinese man or woman speak?
If they speak slowly enough, and if they don't get into politics or anything difficult.
What is this ceramic piece from?
Well, this is, we were in California when this was my first book, Fish Head, and after it came out, we met an artist who did things in ceramic, and I gave her the jacket to this book, and I have there a ceramic fish head.
I'd like to know what gave you the idea for Fish Head, because I happen to love cats, and this particular book is very popular with the children.
Well, the idea came from a friend of ours who's an oceanographer who had just been out on an experimental trip and in a fishing boat off Bermuda, and he said that when they were about 1 or 2 days out at sea when they found that a cat had stowed away, and the whole funny story of this cat trying to find his sea legs and so forth. So that gave me the idea, and I wrote this when my own children were quite small and I was tied down at home, and I suppose that the emotion came from the fact that I perhaps would like to have gone to sea.
So you're saying that was
Or
your
find
first
an island.
book?
Yes, my
That was
first
your
published
first
book,
book.
yes.
It's a picture book and different from the bulk of her work, which is historical fiction. Lynn Ward did the illustrations for 2 of Mrs. Fritz's books, Brady and Early Thunder. While we look at an illustration from each of these books, could you tell us something briefly about the event or person that's shown, Jean?
Well, that's Brady, and he lived in 1836 in western Pennsylvania, the tip of southwestern part that was, the population was made up of half southern and half northern, and his father was a northern preacher, his mother was southern, and he had a very hard time deciding where his own sympathies lay. And it also is a story of the Underground Railroad, which ran right through his home, his own home.
Now we have an illustration from Early Thunder.
And Early Thunder is another critical part of United States history. It takes place in Salem in 1774, and you see there the Liberty Boys drilling. Actually, the first confrontation between the English and the American Liberty Boys took place in Salem in 1774, a year before before we had any, before the Battle of Lexington and so forth. And it's a very little known event, but it was what really prompted me to follow up the Salem history and get involved in that.
This original drawing by Ward that I'm holding is from Brady, and it hangs in the author's home. Want to tell us what's taking place here?
That's at the end of the book, where Brady also had a hard time making his father respect him, because he was a boy who couldn't keep secrets, and he found a runaway slave hidden on his father's property, which was a pretty important secret to keep. And he finally, in this picture, he is holding a candle at his father's bedside when he has finally proved to his father that he can not only keep a secret, but he can behave like a man.
Yes, this is the denouement of the book. It's a significant moment. I think we ought to talk for a minute about those 2 books, Brady and Early Thunder. Brady is one of my all-time favorites, and I'm not alone in that opinion. The American Library Association declared it a notable children's book in 1960. Thought you could tell us perhaps what you're trying to show in this book.
I have taken in Brady and Early Thunder and another book, I, Adam, moments of decision in our history of our country, and put a boy right square in the middle of it, where he would really, where the history actually touched his life, his private life, in such a way where he had to make a decision himself, which is, of course, very much what's happening now, too, isn't it?
Exactly, and I was wondering whether the idea or the theme of the books came first, or whether the incident came. You found the story, or you created the story. I'd like to know where you got some of your ideas, from a newspaper clipping, or created them out of your own mind, or where. Or did you have, was this the theme that you wanted to show, and then you found the plot?
It works both ways, I think. In Early Thunder, if I can talk about that just a minute, I knew that I wanted to get into the years before the Revolution, because it seemed to me that it wasn't all that easy to have decided which side you were going to be on. I think that American children in their textbook education are just take for granted that they would be a patriot. And yet when you really go into the history and get into the first-hand accounts, you can see that really it wasn't such an easy decision to make. So that I gave this boy a loyalist father, and also a father that had problems of his own. And I tried to, when I went to Salem and did the research, I discovered this incident that had this confrontation, which I knew right away. You find, as you're doing research, you suddenly come across, I've often thought of it like as if it were archaeology. You dig, and you suddenly have a find, and you know that's part of the story. And when I found that incident, I know that's the end. That's what I'm working to. The decision will come during that incident. And then the characters have to grow with you. You live with them a long time before you dare write anything.
I think that young people today are in the same situation, and have been for years, and probably will continue. The Vietnam War, you would have in a family,
exactly.
A father who felt one way and a mother who felt the other.
That's right.
And right now you must have parents who are separated in their ideas as to whether the current government is right or wrong. And these young people, what are they going to do?
I have felt, I have for about 8 years been very much involved in the American Revolution. It just happens that the bicentennial comes now.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't start me. But I have become very much involved in the research, and I have been constantly thinking about the parallels, and very much aware and impressed about how just as you said, how parallel the times are.
Would you say then that with this book you plotted it from beginning to end, or from end to beginning?
I had the beginning, yes.
To.
I had the beginning and I had the end, and I plotted the betweens.
Aha,
yes.
aha,
Mm-hmm.
I see. With reference to Early Thunder, what's the source of the title?
Oh, the source of the title just came from many dinner table conversations when we were trying to find the right title.
But it does refer to the critical years
the
before
early thunder
the burst
refers,
of the storm.
Right. The thunder before it actually comes. That's.
It seems to me that this book is an example of a quotation from yours, a quotation of yours, that I often align myself with some people who go too far, and find myself in conflict with some people who have a great deal in common with me. I'm paraphrasing it. Does that apply here? The loyalists and the revolutionaries, one incident where the revolutionaries seem to have gone too far for your protagonist?
Yes. I think that this is the dilemma that everyone faces, whether it's revolutionary times or now, that there aren't just two sides. There are usually 4 or 5 or 6 sides, because they're all shadings, and you have to find out where you fit within these shadings. It isn't just black and white.
The old cliche, politics makes strange bedfellows, is true of
yes.
this situation.
Well, Early Thunder enjoys the rarity of being one of the few fictional works recommended by the Library of Congress for reading in honor of the bicentennial. I thought maybe you could tell us if you're doing any other books in preparation for the bicentennial.
Yes, I have. I'm doing a group of books. The first one came out last fall. It's called And Then What Happened, Paul Revere. And I'm taking various people that played a part in the American Revolution and trying to really find out things about them that aren't normally known in textbooks, which is what I like to do. And I'm not too reverent either. I don't want to have them, these aren't textbook figures. I want to make them really live. And I like them so much. I have been so involved with them that they're a part of kind of a second world for me. So that Paul Revere is a very active man with his finger in many, many pies. And that's the first book. And this coming year, I have a book on for the same age level on Samuel Adams, and that will be called Why Don't You Get a Horse, Sam Adams? And then comes Where Was Patrick Henry on the 29th of May? And following that comes a book on the very vain John Hancock, whose, I think the title of that is going to be, Will You Just Look at John Hancock? And I am going in May to England and work in the Royal Archives, hopefully. I understand the Queen has to give me her permission, and we're trying to get that so that I can do a book on George III as the final book that'll appear in '76.
I've read this, and I want to tell you, first of all, it's won the American Library Association Notable Children's Book Award, no small feat. And if all of the books in the series will be like this, I predict that they're going to be very popular, unlike most historical fiction. First of all, it's short, you can see, humorous, and at the same time authentic, and has the advantage of being at an easier reading level. That's what's destroyed a lot of historical fiction, that it's, too difficult to read, but not so here. It's much at the same level as an earlier work of yours, George Washington's Breakfast.
I feel that this is just slightly older, and I think also that this is the shortness of it, I hope will lend itself to being read aloud in 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, because the material is certainly, I've tried to show a lot of the humorous aspects and take that a light-hearted attitude in all of these books. But
even the drawings are sort of tongue-in-cheek.
Well, it's really a hysterical story.
Hysterical.
And the title is funny. And the story is. I think it'll be extremely popular.
What are some of your other writing plans, aside from these books honoring the bicentennial?
Oh, that's keeping me busy at the moment. I haven't gone beyond that.
Yeah. Well, Carolyn, do you have some questions?
Well, I'd like to ask her a little bit about her early background and starting out in writing, because I think all young people and students, teachers and so on are interested in knowing what you did as a child. Did you read a lot yourself?
Yes, I read.
You said you were lonely.
Yes.
Did you have books? What kind of books did you read?
Yes, I did have books, and I had a mother that loved reading and got books. And I started writing, I think, just about the same time I started reading, because of, I think Elizabeth Bowen once said that people who write are almost always have lonely childhoods. And I think that you do reach out for communication in this way. The books that I liked were I remember the summer that I discovered the Bobbsey twins. Now, the Bobbsey twins are not what we would call in children's literature the best of children's literature. But after all, here I was in China and reading a book about two inseparable children in America, camping, doing all the things I wanted to do. So that was a great summer. And in addition to the Bobbsey twins, however, I can remember that summer I also read The Secret Garden, and I remember having a book of Indian legends and some of Hawthorne's stories, so that it was a very...
variety.
Yes.
And you did start writing early. I know that you won a prize or had something published when you were about 8, which is...
in St. Nicholas Magazine, when that was...
Which is too bad we don't have more magazines where young writers can get themselves published, and it will help them in their writing, I think.
Discuss the writing process for us for a moment. Whether or not you do your rough draft at the typewriter, whether or not you outline, if you revise much.
The hardest part of the writing is always done in bed at night. Yes. No, it's when you're starting a book or when you're involved in a book, you just have to count on a number of sleepless nights quite frequently, because that's when the creative juices seem to be working. And in the morning, you do sit down, or I do, and people often say, oh, you have to be so disciplined, but you really, I feel very guilty saying that I'm disciplined, because I'm not. I'm compulsive. And the discipline comes the fact that I ever get into the kitchen at all. That's where the discipline lies. But I work a long day when I'm writing, and I work very slowly. If I do 2 typewritten pages in a day, 6 to 8 hours, I'm lucky.
You're a perfectionist.
No, I'm slow. And I write first in longhand, and at the end of the day, I put that on, I type that up. And the first thing the next morning, I read that, and as a matter of fact, I not only read that, I read everything in the story up to and through that, so that I get a feel of the rhythm of the whole thing, and where there can be need to be revisions before I go on to the rest of it.
You don't outline?
Well, not in too organized a way. If I'm doing a book with research, I have volumes of notes, and I have it in my mind where they're going to go. But of course, the research I have notebook after notebook on the research.
What about the characters? Do you take bits and pieces from people you know, or?
Beware.
Yes. Yes, I do, of course, not in the nonfiction, obviously, but in the fiction, usually there are parts, not all one person, but there's
But you
parts.
have children of your own now, too. Do you use
Yes.
them at all in your books?
My children are grown now, and of course the whole experience of having children is very much a part of the books.
Were you very much influenced in your writing by having been a librarian at one point? I think you worked in the Dobbs Ferry Children's Book Department.
Yes, well,
Library.
that way I got completely familiar with children's books, and I think that anything that you're going to do to be familiar with the field is important.
It sort of inspired How to Read a Rabbit, didn't it? That's about, in case some of the people haven't read it, that's about a lending library of animals.
Well, that actually, there are, you know.
I know,
Yes,
I know.
there
Now
are.
there are more than ever.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right. Yes, yes. Well, that.
Was that before they were very popular?
Well, I heard about them, and I didn't make them up. I heard there were such things, and then that started the train of thought.
Have you not also taught would-be writers and teachers of children's literature?
Yes, I have done both. I've done it this last 3 years. I've been teaching groups of in-service teaching of teachers
In Westchester County,
in Westchester County in children's literature, which I find is very exciting, because once teachers use children's books in the classroom changes.
Oh, talk about that a little bit more, since my people here would be interested.
Well, I think that there was a student that I had last semester, a young man who, like many people who have never read children's books since they have been adults, hadn't paid much attention to it. He wanted his class to read, but he himself hadn't read. And after he got into children's books, he really discovered, he was really turned on by it. And so that he came in one day and he said, it's made all the difference. He said, today some boy came into the class and said, have you read any good books this week? And he said, I knew. And he came in and we began that way, that something had happened.
Do you ever read your manuscripts to children? Have the children read them at all?
No, just my own children when they were small.
When they were small.
Because children are apt to say, they don't want to hurt your feelings. They say it's good. Well, I don't depend on that. My children didn't do that. They were very critical.
I'm sure. Do you do much rewriting after you send it in to your
Oh,
editor?
sometimes there are books. The first books were rewritten a lot, and some books need more than others. But rewriting, when I had a workshop for people who did writing, and they discovered that the main thing you have to find out is you have to be willing to rewrite.
I have another picture book that you've done. As Dr. Shachter says, most of your books are historical fiction for the older, but this one is called Tap Tap Lion 1, 2, 3. Now, whatever started you on that, doing this picture book?
No, I can't even remember.
Allow me. We have it in our
Yes, of course I know the book,
collection.
but I don't, I just guess it was the idea of turning things around and having the animals play children's games.
Carolyn, you told me you had a question concerning I, Adam.
Oh, well, that happens to be one of my favorite books, and again, it has the problem of the
Decision.
boy
Yes.
having to make a decision. I think one of the things I like about it so much is the fact that the boy had such a tremendous sense of responsibility for himself with his family, and he wanted to do what he thought was right, which I think young people today need to develop. A lot of them have it, but a lot of them need to develop this sense of responsibility to the family. Now, what I wanted to know is, where did you get the idea? I'm always interested in knowing where you get the plot, the story, or Adam. Was it
Well,
somebody you knew that...
No, it wasn't. I think it started because I wanted to do something with the coastal part of New England. I am very devoted to New England, and it was the place that started that, then the research, and then the story evolved during the course of
You
research.
said you like to go to sea, you thought you'd like to go to sea
Yeah,
yourself?
I'm very partial to the ocean. Anything that gets me close to the ocean in reality or in imagination is fine with me.
And I think also in I, Adam is good because it points up the importance of school and study and learning and developing your mind.
Yes, one of the things that I think that children often, not children, but adults too often forget is in the early days of schooling, really what a rough time teachers had, and that a lot of the things that we would consider delinquent today were passed off as practical jokes at one time.
Oh, my students here will say to you, they have a tough time now. I have veteran teachers here in this group too, and you know.
Oh, I believe that. Yes, I believe you.
It's a tough road.
But you've never been smoked out of a classroom.
You mean actual fires set?
Smoked out of the classroom. This was a common thing in the 18th century.
Oh, no, I never
Yes.
heard of that.
Oh,
Don't
well.
give any ideas to the current student population. That's all we need.
Frogs and bugs in your desk and things.
I do want to thank you very much, Jean Fritz. Our guest today has had over 20 books published. Some of them have won the ALA Notable Book Award. Not only does that include Brady and Then What Happened, Paul Revere, but also I, Adam. Our guest has primarily published historical fiction, also picture books that have been previously mentioned, and a work of fantasy, Magic to Burn. It's really been very good having you with us today. be the reason for part two. We are very much